The entertainment business is a brutal, unfair thing. As much as we'd like to believe there's a big plan for our favorite movies and TV shows, the truth is those plans can get derailed. We'll always regret never getting to see these stories come to life.
Star Trek writers and executives have had a lot of ideas, but most get red-shirted before they hit the airwaves. It's too bad because some sounded awesome. Here are some great Star Trek projects we never got to see. In 1992, the city of Las Vegas drew up an ambitious and, we have to say it, enterprising plan to bring more families to the Strip and boost the gambling revenue. They would pull tourists away from the flashier casinos with a full-size model of the Starship Enterprise. The original plan spared no expense. The Enterprise would be built exactly to the fictional specifications of the TV show, omitting, unfortunately, the phasers and photon torpedoes, making it look like the old gal plopped down right in the middle of Vegas. Guests could tour the ship and witness faithful reproductions of the sets from the TV shows and movies, and with no exterior supports to keep the reproduction faithful, the ship was a minor engineering miracle, something that would have made even Scotty proud. So what happened? Basically, Paramount killed the project for being too audacious. According to the Paramount CEO, if they made a bad movie,
emergency power to inertial dampers.
The auto sequencer was damaged by phaser fire.
Transferring controls to manual.
everybody would forget about it in a year. If this tourist trap didn't pan out, however, it'd be around forever. That was the nail in the coffin. Vegas went with the less spectacular Fremont Street experience, and millions of Star Trek fans cried more than they did when Spock died. Less than a year after Star Trek premiered, the show was already in trouble, and Gene Roddenberry had no clue whether his show would survive. Preparing for the worst, he started developing a new show called Assignment Earth. At first, Assignment Earth had nothing to do with Star Trek. It told the story of Gary Seven, a time traveler who traveled to the past to make sure Earth history ran the way it was supposed to. Accompanied by a present-day secretary, a supercomputer, and a shape-shifting cat, Seven would fight off evil aliens trying to mess up Earth history.
Would you mind telling me who that is?
That, Miss Lincoln, is simply my cat.
Fortunately, or not, depending on how stoked you are about a show that was basically Trek meets Doctor Who, the tides eventually turned and Roddenberry soon realized he could only get the new show going if it was connected to Star Trek. He retooled the idea as a spin-off, making the dubious decision to use an episode of Star Trek as a backdoor pilot for the proposed series. This ended up being the second season finale of Star Trek, basically ending the season as an advertisement for a different TV show with an episode barely featuring Kirk and Spock. To add salt to the wound, NBC passed on the series, making the lame crossover episode even worse. The original Star Trek was canceled after 3 seasons, but in the following years it was hugely popular in syndication. In 1977, Paramount decided to take advantage of that and regrouped around a new Star Trek idea called Phase 2. Right from the start, Paramount planned to give the show the budget the original series never had, and 13 episodes were fully scripted by some of the best sci-fi writers of the era. As Phase 2 was about to enter production, however, Paramount decided out of nowhere that they should make a movie instead and put all the money into Star Trek the Motion Picture. Tons of elements from Phase 2 were reused in the film, and a couple of scripts were eventually adapted into episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation during a writer's strike, but the rest of the 13-episode season was left on the shelf when Phase 2 was phased out. Since the 90s, fans have wanted to see what the Federation was like after The Next Generation. But CBS almost gave us what we wanted in 2006 with the groundbreaking Star Trek Final Frontier. Instead of a live-action TV show, Final Frontier was a web-only animated series by Zero Room Productions, exploring the dark future of the Federation centuries after Picard and his crew. During a war with the Romulan Empire, mysterious explosions of Omega particles rendered huge chunks of space impossible to travel via warp, essentially cutting the Federation in half. Anybody trapped in these regions of space would take hundreds of years to travel anywhere else, which stranded starships, including a rundown Enterprise, in vast nothingness. Even worse, political instability forced the Vulcans to leave the Federation, destroyed the Andorians, and allowed the Romulans to occupy the Klingon Empire. It's not exactly the utopian future viewers were used to, but CBS wanted to parallel the global upheavals following 9/11. Eventually, though, the network lost interest, which is probably for the best. When it's all you see on the news, most people don't want to think about the miserable realities of global conflict and terrorism when they watch Star Trek. The proposed designs and storyboards made it online, though, and it turns out that those are actually pretty good. When you never actually make the show, it's pretty hard to screw it up. Before J.J. Abrams rebooted the franchise on the big screen, Paramount was looking at developing Star Trek: The Beginning, a darker take set during the Earth-Romulan War decades before the original series. The Romulans conduct a gigantic sneak attack on Earth and, in a not-so-subtle reference to the Nazis, demand that all Vulcans are turned over to Romulan extermination camps. The United Federation of Planets sends Tiberius Chase, a hotshot pilot and ancestor to Kirk, out on a secret war against the Romulan fleet. Unsurprisingly, the show had some truly insane elements. Tiberius Chase's family are a bunch of xenophobes living in Antarctica, and Paramount wanted to play up the obvious Holocaust parallels. With Tiberius conducting a guerrilla war against the Romulans, it seems like this was a mixture of Inglourious Basterds and Star Trek, and if done well, that could actually be pretty awesome. Eventually, though, Paramount decided The Beginning was a little too dark, and the project was shelved. Instead, Paramount went for J.J. Abrams and the opposite of darkness, lens flares.
The Empire Strikes Back is considered by many Star Wars fans to be the best film in the franchise. However, it wasn't the first Star Wars sequel planned. That honor goes to Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was published as a novel in 1978 but never filmed. Here's a look back at the Star Wars movie sequel we never got to see. Fans can debate George Lucas's merits as a director and a writer for all eternity, but one thing nobody can deny is that the guy is a master businessman. Before Star Wars was even filmed, Lucas had a master plan for the franchise. So when he hired Alan Dean Foster to write up the novelization of Star Wars, Lucas decided to sign him up for a second book as well. The plan? If Star Wars was a hit, the novel would hold over fans until the film sequel was ready. If it wasn't a hit, they could use the book as a blueprint for a cheap follow-up film. Thus, Splinter of the Mind's Eye was born. One of the biggest challenges facing Foster was the fact that he had to write it without ever actually seeing Star Wars. In fact, when he sat down to start the novel, Lucas wasn't even completely finished writing Star Wars. With only some concept drawings and a quick visit to ILM to see the models, Foster began planning Splinter of the Mind's Eye. There was one more problem, though. He wasn't even allowed to use half the characters. It's hard to imagine Star Wars without Han Solo, but Splinter of the Mind's Eye didn't have a single appearance from everyone's favorite smuggler. Why? When Foster was getting ready to write the novel, Harrison Ford hadn't yet signed on to film any Star Wars sequels. Since the whole plan was to eventually film Splinter of the Mind's Eye, that meant Foster couldn't use Solo at all in the book, just in case. That also meant no Chewbacca.
You made a fair move.
Given the fact that Foster wrote Splinter of the Mind's Eye before the final draft of the Star Wars screenplay was completed, it's no surprise that there are some discrepancies. Most of them are minor details like terminology or the color of Darth Vader's lightsaber, but one bigger thing sticks out: the relationship between Luke and Leia. 2 years before the infamous scene in Empire where the two kiss, Foster wrote out a storyline where the pair are teamed up on a mission and end up with some pretty clear sexual tension. Beyond losing two of the main characters before he even started, Foster also had to write according to a very specific set of guidelines. Since Lucas's plans to film Splinter presumed they would have a tiny budget for the sequel, Foster was instructed to only write scenes that would be super cheap to film. Hypothetical budget concerns also led to Splinter being set almost entirely in caves, inside buildings, or on the surface of a fog-shrouded swamp planet. As for the big space battles that made Star Wars famous, forget it. Lucas forced Foster to cut an exciting battle between TIE fighters and X-Wings just in case. If the fact that Splinter takes place on a swamp planet perpetually cloaked in fog sounds a lot like Dagobah from Empire Strikes Back, that's not the only bit from Splinter that ended up making its way into the films. Case in point, the climactic battle between Luke and Vader ends up with one of them having an arm cut off. Unlike in Empire, though, it's Vader instead of Luke who loses a limb. More interestingly, though, that fight begins with Leia picking up Luke's lightsaber and going toe-to-toe in a saber duel with Vader. If that sounds like a mirror image of the fight between Rey and Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens, it might not be a coincidence. Foster was also hired to write the novelization of The Force Awakens. The plot of Splinter of the Mind's Eye revolves around Luke and Leia searching for an artifact called the Kyber Crystal, which amplifies the powers of those who are Force-sensitive. And that leads to the book's coolest moment, the return of Obi-Wan Kenobi. If you were wondering how an untrained Luke could defeat Darth Vader in a lightsaber duel, the book implies it's because the Kyber Crystal allows Obi-Wan's spirit to inhabit Luke's body. With Luke's body, Obi-Wan gets a chance to exact some revenge on his former pupil from beyond the grave. In fact, Obi-Wan actually obliquely references this sequence in Empire Strikes Back, when he warns Luke that he can no longer interfere in Luke's campaign against Vader.
I'm just so tired of all these Star Wars.
That scene wasn't in the movie.
Yeah, it was. It got cut.
Splinter of the Mind's Eye holds a unique and weird place in Star Wars history. It was never made into a film, but some of its ideas did trickle down into the official trilogy. It's no longer considered to be canon, yet has remained in print for nearly 40 years, along with the 1995 comic book adaptation. For many fans who read it, it's just as much a part of the Star Wars story as Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. It provides a fascinating look at what might have been, an alternate reality where Star Wars was a flop, Luke and Leia were lovers, and Han Solo abandoned the rebellion. Most of all, it's still a darn good read. Foster agrees, telling Cinelinx, "I'm very proud of it as I am of everything I write. I especially feel that it caught the spirit of the first film and continued it."
Some stories are just too big to be told with one measly movie. Proper blockbuster epics like The Lord of the Rings or the Dark Knight films are stretched out across a trilogy, raking in big bucks for the studio year after year after year. But not all of these trilogies manage to fully materialize. Here are a few epic stories that will probably never be wrapped up with a third film. The tagline for 2010's remake of Clash of the Titans was, "Titans will clash," which does an excellent job of summing up both the plot of the movie and what the filmmakers thought of the flick's target audience. Despite this, the film did okay at the box office and earned not as awful as expected reviews. A sequel was immediately announced, and then a third part announced before that sequel was even released.
One day, somebody's gonna have to make a stand. One day, somebody's gotta say enough.
2012's Wrath of the Titans underperformed at the box office, pulling in only $83 million domestically, about half of what the original managed. Despite having been announced back in 2011, the final part of the trilogy was put on hold indefinitely. By 2013, a producer went on record saying he couldn't see Titans 3 happening without fresh ideas. Conan was the 1982 film that introduced us to Arnie's bulging pecs, turning the Austrian muscle man into a global star despite his super thick accent.
Crom, I've never prayed you before. I have no tongue for it.
That's all you need to know to understand the fate of the Conan trilogy, which would have seen 1984's sequel Conan the Destroyer followed in 1987 by a final entry. Sadly, for fans of Arnold in a loincloth, 1984 was also the year a little movie called The Terminator was released. The idea of any B-movie being able to afford Arnie after that was unlikely, to say the least. Fast forward to 2016, when Conan 3 seemed like a sure thing with the post-politics Arnold hyping the project, but the studio ultimately decided to can it in April 2017. Yes, there are already 3 Divergent films, but the trilogy is technically incomplete. The third film, Divergent Allegiant, is only based on the first half of the final Divergent book. Just like the Harry Potter series sliced Deathly Hallows into 2 parts, Summit Entertainment decided to turn the Allegiant book into 2 films, Allegiant and Ascendant. But Ascendant never took off.
What's going on here? They're shutting us down.
After breaking box office records with 1989's Batman, director Tim Burton and star Michael Keaton returned 3 years later with Batman Returns, a movie that hinted at more adventures to come. In 1995, those adventures dutifully arrived, only now they were a neon-drenched debacle fronted by Val Kilmer, directed by Joel Schumacher, and featuring a bright green Jim Carrey chewing the scenery. What happened? Burton's trilogy was ultimately sunk by its controversial and underperforming middle part. Sure, Batman Returns received positive reviews and was a box office smash, but it didn't perform nearly as well as the first film. And it was widely criticized in the press for being too dark and violent for kids, damaging McDonald's Happy Meal sales.
Now you can get a Batman car and a McDonald's Happy Meal. There's Catwoman's Coupe, Batman's launching Batmobile, or the Penguin's Roadster. One toy with each Happy Meal you buy.
So Warner Brothers chucked Burton, Keaton left, and the final part of the trilogy was replaced by 2 ridiculous Schumacher films. What would Burton's Batman 3 have looked like? Billy D. Williams, who played Harvey Dent in the '89 Batman, was set to play Two-Face. He finally got the role in 2017's The Lego Batman Movie. Marlon Wayans was cast as Robin in Batman Returns, but he was left on the cutting room floor. Industry rumors suggested Robin Williams was meant to play the Riddler, and Michelle Pfeiffer would return as Catwoman. Would it have been any good? Well, it couldn't have been much worse than Batman and Robin.
I'll finish off the city. You kill the kids, but leave me the bat.
On paper, the Millennium Trilogy must have looked like the surest bet in showbiz.
Hollywood movies based on the mega-selling books by Swedish author Stieg Larsson? Directed by David Fincher, the genre-hopping talent behind Fight Club and Seven? Shirtless Daniel Craig?
Shut up and take my money!
The first Millennium movie, 2011's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, managed to pull in $223 million off a $90 million budget, enough to prompt talk of a sequel. There were still 2 books left unfilmed in America at the time, and a Fincher-directed and Craig-fronted Girl Who Played with Fire and Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest would surely generate a tidy profit. But Sony claims Craig wanted too much money to reprise the role of journalist Mikhail Blomkvist for 2 more films. At one point, they considered completing the trilogy with a different lead. Then they ditched Fincher too, and talk of a trilogy went out the window. Not many people know that Roman Polanski's 1974 masterpiece Chinatown already has a sequel. In 1990,
Jack Nicholson reprised the role of grizzled PI Jake Gittes in The Two Jakes,
a sequel that failed to live up to the quality of its predecessor in just about every way.
This town, I'm the leper with the most fingers.
But had The Two Jakes been a box office hit, it would have paved the way for a full-on trilogy.
Gittes vs. Gittes would have seen Nicholson's detective taking on a monopoly controlling access to the LA freeway while also going through a messy divorce.
Unfortunately, The Two Jakes bombed so hard that screenwriter Robert Towne gave up on the idea of Part 3 altogether. The never-filmed third and final Timothy Dalton James Bond movie was conceived as a way of capping the actor's involvement with the franchise. It would have given Dalton's Bond a big send-off while indulging in the themes that made his previous 2 outings so distinct.
According to Charles Helfenstein's The Making of the Living Daylights,
it was known in pre-production as Bond 17 and got as far as the scripting stage. The plot involved a British-Chinese megalomaniac threatening to unleash a worldwide computer virus unless the British returned Hong Kong back to China. Bond 17 stayed on the table right up until 1994, when Dalton got tired of waiting and simply quit the role.
Then you have my resignation, sir. We're not a country club, 007.
Bond was recast with Pierce Brosnan, and Bond 17 became GoldenEye. Perhaps it's just as well. Within 2 years of GoldenEye's release in 1997, Hong Kong was returned to China in the real world, with nary an evil megalomaniac in sight.
Director Matthew Vaughn brought indie comic series Kick-Ass to life on the big screen in 2010.
With Aaron Taylor Johnson starring as the namesake hero. Praised for its adult themes, Kick-Ass received positive reviews from critics and managed to become a modest box office success, prompting Universal to move forward with a sequel. Directed by Jeff Wadlow, Kick-Ass 2 was released in August 2013 to not-so-kick-ass reviews. Although the film was a decent commercial success, it failed to perform as well as the first film. Shortly before the release of Kick-Ass 2, creator Mark Miller confirmed plans for a third movie that would largely depend on how much money the second movie made. In 2015, Vaughn said he'd have to make a Hit Girl prequel before tackling Kick-Ass 3, but don't hold your breath. Hit Girl herself, Chloe Grace Moretz, says poor box office numbers doomed the trilogy, and she's, quote, done with the character. In the wake of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Harry Potter films, studios were scrambling to find the next big fantasy epic. New Line almost found it in His Dark Materials, a grim atheist fantasy series by British writer Philip Pullman that had set the literary world alight a decade earlier. It had battles, baddies, school children sprinting through spectacular set pieces. In a post-Potter world, it seemed a surefire success. And it might have been, if the first film, The Golden Compass, hadn't managed to anger just about everyone. Fans were outraged that New Line tried to water down the book's anti-religion themes, while religious organizations were outraged by the diluted leftovers of those same themes. Fox News even claimed that it was part of that year's War on Christmas, because of course it did.
Religion has been a source of peace, of serenity, of happiness, and I don't understand why militant atheists wish to take that away from kids.
It also didn't help that New Line forced the creation of a cliffhanging, gotta watch the sequel ending in an attempt to milk money right out of viewers' pockets. So it's no big surprise the film made barely $70 million at the domestic box office against its $180 million budget. The global box office added an impressive $300 million, but the damage had already been done to its reputation. The poor reviews and bad box office killed this trilogy as dead as the series' own god.
Director Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy 2: The Golden Army was released in July 2008, 4 years after the modestly successful original. It also wasn't a monster hit, so Universal Pictures never commissioned a third installment. 2 years after Hellboy 2 was released, Del Toro told Rotten Tomatoes he was interested in potentially making another Hellboy movie. 2 years after that, star Ron Perlman donned his full Hellboy costume to visit a terminally ill child. That bit of kindness inspired Del Toro to push for another film, telling Entertainment Weekly, "I can say publicly that now we are together in trying to do Hellboy 3. But nothing ever happened. Perlman said if Hellboy 3 were to happen, it would need to be twice as big as the previous 2 installments, which Del Toro said would cost around $120 million to produce. No studio was willing to put up that kind of money for a franchise that likely wouldn't crack $500 million. In January 2017, Del Toro polled Twitter users on whether they wanted Hellboy 3, got positive feedback, then had a couple meetings about it. But by February, it was all over. Del Toro tweeted that 100% the sequel will not happen, and that is to be the final thing about it.
Give it up, pal. It's over. I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Meanwhile, the lousy performance of the 2019 Hellboy film from director Neil Marshall and star David Harbour is a further sign Del Toro's trilogy isn't likely to ever finish. In 2015, Sony Pictures suspended plans to continue the Andrew Garfield-led Amazing Spider-Man franchise and instead opted to share the character with Marvel Studios. Tom Holland took over as Spidey in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a rebooted Spider-Man film series. But what were Sony's original plans? Before the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in 2014, Sony planned to launch an extended Spider-Man franchise to compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was going to include 2 more Amazing Spider-Man films as well as spin-offs featuring Venom and the group of villains known as the Sinister Six. Sony also hired Lisa Joy Nolan to write a script for a female superhero movie set in their Spider-Man universe, but nothing has come of it. 20th Century Fox's first Fantastic Four movie starring Ioan Gruffudd, Jessica Alba, Chris Evans, and Michael Chiklis as the titular heroes released in 2005 to mixed reviews. However, fan anticipation led Fantastic Four to become a box office success, earning over 3 times its production budget. Director Tim Story and the rest of the cast and crew all returned for the 2007 follow-up, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. That one received mixed to negative reviews and performed slightly worse at the worldwide box office. Those mediocre box office results made Fox hesitant about immediately pursuing a sequel. But there was hope, at least for a little while. All 5 of the main cast members, including Julian McMahon, who played Dr. Doom, signed 3-picture deals. They were also interested in making another movie and diving deeper into the Fantastic Four mythos. Although Story was keen to make 2 more films, Fox put an end to the series. In 2008, Evans, who later famously became Captain America, said the franchise is, quote, a closed book.
So I guess this is it. We all go our separate ways.
Just a few short months prior to Kill Bill hitting theaters, director Quentin Tarantino and Miramax concluded that the 4-hour film would have to be split into 2 releases. Although they aren't his most commercially successful films, the 2-part Grindhouse homage has become a cult hit in the years since. The second film ends pretty definitively with Bill dying and Beatrix and Bibi leaving together. However, Tarantino believes there's always room for more. In 2004, he indicated plans to make a 3rd Kill Bill with Uma Thurman, reprising her role as Beatrix Kiddo. But Tarantino said he would probably wait around 15 years before making another one. Tarantino said the story would potentially focus on, quote, the revenge of 2 killers whose arms and eye were hacked by Uma Thurman in the first stories, or a daughter's revenge story. But nothing ever came of either idea. In 2012, Tarantino finally conceded it probably wouldn't happen. And in February 2018, Thurman called Tarantino out for making her drive a car too fast while filming, ultimately crashing and injuring herself. Don't expect them to work together again anytime soon.
You and I have unfinished business.
Baby, you ain't kidding.
Romancing the Stone was the sleeper hit of 1984, thanks in no small part to stars Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner having instant on-screen chemistry. Fox was so impressed, it immediately rushed out a sequel, The Jewel of the Nile. Although Nile did well at the box office, it was reportedly hell to make. Den of Geek reports that neither Turner nor Douglas wanted to do the picture and only agreed after Fox threatened to take them to court for breach of contract. But easy money is easy money, and it wasn't long before Douglas announced that a final chapter, The Crimson Eagle, would soon be released. IGN notes Douglas quit his role in 1997's U-571 to focus on it. It would have been the first proper Hollywood and Bollywood co-production had it not vanished into development hell. By 2011, the talk was about a remake of the original, which in turn was replaced by a TV series that also seems to have now dropped off the radar. Zack Snyder was the driving force of the DCEU at the start, directing Man of Steel in 2013, followed by Batman vs. Superman in 2016, before teaming up with Joss Whedon for 2017's half-dark, half-goofy, all-flop Justice League. After 3 critical maulings plus worse-than-expected box office, DC canceled all remaining plans for Snyder-fronted movies. But according to Kevin Smith's Fat Man Beyond podcast, Snyder was apparently planning a whole Justice League trilogy. Smith talked to many people involved with the planned trilogy. He claims Part 2 would have introduced the Green Lantern and intergalactic villain Darkseid, who would have defeated the League, arrived on Earth, and killed a significant percentage of its population. Sound familiar? Part 3 would have seen the League regroup and return to Earth, finally defeating Darkseid. Speed was a sleeper hit in 1994. The movie about a bus equipped with a bomb that would go off if it dipped below 50 miles per hour set the box office alight and proved that Keanu Reeves was a bona fide action star. It also seemed to prove that people really wanted to see vehicle-based action movies. Well, that theory proved to have several holes in it after the debut of Speed 2: Cruise Control, a movie about a bomb on perhaps the least exciting, least speedy of all vehicles, a cruise ship. The Keanu-less Speed 2 sank. Speed wasn't originally planned as a trilogy, and despite Speed 2's dismal box office and critical performance, it wasn't long before rumors of Speed 3 began floating around. As late as 2008, Den of Geek reported Reeves was set to return to the franchise, giving it the send-off it deserved. Although a treatment made its way onto the internet, the proposed Speed capstone never made it to production. The young adult book series Percy Jackson and the Olympians is about a teenage boy who discovers he has the powers of a demigod. The movie series Percy Jackson is a cautious morality tale about what happens when a bunch of producers discover they can make serious money, ruining books for everyone. The first Percy Jackson movie, The Lightning Thief, did well enough to warrant a sequel, Sea of Monsters. Although the second movie received a mixed critical response, a third installment was still greenlit. Nothing came of that film, titled The Titan's Curse. As early as 2014, star Logan Lerman was saying he thought it was unlikely that the series would ever be completed.
Cliffhangers are a great way to keep audiences interested in what happens next, but they only work if something, actually comes next. All too often, shows and movies leave audiences hanging, then never follow up. John Carpenter's 1982 classic The Thing offered up one of the most ambiguous endings of all time. After an alien monster turns everyone else into an extension of itself, we're left with 2 people stuck in a snowstorm: Kurt Russell's MacReady and Keith David's Childs.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
Good plan, MacReady. Except now we've been waiting almost 40 years and we still haven't seen what happens. We'll never find out if one of them is the Thing, or if they simply turn into popsicles before finding out for sure. There was once going to be an actual answer in the form of a sequel. According to Coming Attractions, in 2005, the Sci-Fi Channel announced plans for a miniseries titled Return of the Thing. The big reveal would have been that MacReady and Childs froze, with neither revealing themselves as the Thing. That may or may not have been the plot they would have filmed, but we'll never know because Sci-Fi shelved the series before starting. For all we know, Childs and MacReady are still staring each other down to this day. You think you're optimistic? You've got nothing on the makers of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Despite clearly making a terrible film, they actually ended on a cliffhanger. Daisy returns to the brothers, gun in hand, saying she needs their help again. Obviously, a sequel never came around, and since then we've had to fill the void with awesome Mario video games, so really it hasn't been that bad. But if you really want to know what might have happened next, you need to turn to fan fiction. In 2013, 2 fans wrote an unofficial sequel comic called Super Mario Bros. 2. Unfortunately, the comic also ended on a cliffhanger, so there's still no resolution to the Mario cinematic universe. Maybe someday.
Well, you don't know it could happen.
How could that possibly happen?
Anything's possible, Mario. You just gotta believe.
In the middle of the 3rd season, ABC Family announced their sci-fi series Kyle XY wouldn't be renewed. It couldn't have come at a worse time. Kyle was just learning who he was, why he had no memories, and why he had no belly button. The big season-ending cliffhanger, the realization that Cassidy was Kyle's real father, was the last anyone would ever see of this show. If you want a general idea of what might have happened, the Season 3 DVD has a short featurette in which the writers and producers talk about what they had planned for Season 4. It's not the same as actually watching a story unfold, but it's better than nothing. After 4 seasons, Mork and Mindy ended in perhaps the most confusing way possible. The season was set to end on an epic cliffhanger, where Mork and Mindy escape a renegade alien and find themselves traveling through time. They wind up in the prehistoric era with seemingly no hope of returning. Then, ABC canceled the show. Adding to the confusion, the show didn't technically end on the cliffhanger, but instead with a random On Earth episode where Mork tries to earn a promotion from his supreme leader. The audience is left to assume they made it back to modern times and solved the villain problem without telling anyone.
Don't hit me now! General destruction. You can see it right now. Blood, death, everything. Don't tickle me, don't tickle me, don't tickle me! That's what happened.